Hello, welcome to ELA 9 Distance Learning. I'm Mr. Smith, and this is our third video in our series, and we are focusing today on thesis writing, as it says right here. We've previously covered our basic introduction and our assignment overview with our rubric. If you've not yet viewed those videos, please take the opportunity to do so. Before we get into thesis writing today, I want to take the opportunity to do a little bit of housekeeping, as we like to do in our class, and talk about a couple things. I want to remind people that I'm going to be reaching out throughout this week through a bunch of different modes, through talking points, through email. I'm going to try to make some phone calls for people that I haven't gotten in contact with, so you can look out for those. Mainly to talk about the idea that the argumentative essay is something that I want people to kind of, at least from what I've heard, I want people to kind of take a breather, not so much a breather, but more, a lot of people are rushing that I'm talking to. They're thinking that they have to accomplish this all in 2 days or 3 days. And we have, at this point now, still 3 weeks, right? We have all this week, all next week, and then April break. So the design of the assignment, first of all, is the argumentative essay that has 5 parts, right? If you go back to the assignment sheet, look, there's 5 parts to it. If you have any questions, again, reach out to me, email me, talking points, get to me that way. But there's 5 pieces to that. Make sure you're doing all those. But there's also the reading that you should be doing 30 minutes a day that you have to be logging. So please be doing that. And then there's a bonus. But you don't have to be doing like the entire argumentative essay the first day. I got some people that are like, oh my God, my final copy. And I'm like, final copy, it's our second day. So take this time and kind of slow it down. And that's why you notice that I'm only on thesis writing. I'm moving through these videos a little bit slower. I had originally thought I was going to put down, all 13 videos in the first couple of days, but then I kind of decided I wanted to do maybe 2 a day, or 2 every couple of days, just because I want people to take their time, relax. I understand the need to get work done, but you have work for other classes as well. I want people to feel that they're not pressured and they're not rushed. So again, reach out to me if you have concerns or questions. I'm going to also enable the comments on YouTube, provided they don't get out of control, as a way for people to reach out to me through that. I check all those things every day, all those modes, at least a couple different times. So please, please, please feel free to reach out to me. And then also, if there's somebody that you know that you haven't seen, either from our class or from another class, a friend of yours that you're talking to through a different mode, please either give them this YouTube channel link, or give them my email, or try to connect with them in some way to let them know what's going on, because I want to make sure that everybody has access. And if there's somebody that you're not seeing, or somebody that you talk to and they're like, oh, what are we doing in ELA? I haven't talked to Mr. Smith. He has no idea what's going on. Then that might mean that I've been trying to reach out to them and I haven't been able to get them. So please feel comfortable letting them know what's happening, and I would really appreciate that. So let's get into it. Video number 3 is thesis writing. So for me, at least, I have it set up, but I've moved things around as my slide number 13. So the goal for this today is for us to go over the basics. I'm gonna move myself a little bit over here, but I'm still here, see? The video will provide the basics on thesis statements, right? The thesis statement we're gonna talk about is the most important sentence of the entire essay. I'll say that again. It's the most important statement, sentence. It's the major claim of your essay. We're going to talk about what it is. We're going to talk about how to write one. We're going to look at some samples. So the construction of this sentence, if you've written your paper already, you got to go back and look to make sure, A, that you have a thesis statement, and B, that it's a darn good one. Because if it's not, or you don't have one, then I equate it to building a house. You have to have a good foundation upon which your house is built. And if you don't, the house is going to collapse on itself. So it's the same thing. If you don't have a good thesis statement, your house is going to fall apart. Your essay is going to fall apart. So that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that you have a good, solid thesis statement. So what are we talking about when we're talking about a thesis statement? It's, again, the most important sentence in your paper. And it tells me what you're talking about. It tells me what your paper is going to prove. Because ultimately, we think about this, you're not proving facts. This is statement number 4 here. if you're proving facts, then the point of your paper is, not necessarily important. Like you have an opinion here. I always go back to like Coke versus Pepsi. If I think Coke is better than Pepsi, that's not a fact. That's my opinion. So I'm going to prove it with evidence. I'm going to go find facts to support why I believe Coke is better than Pepsi. So a thesis in this regard is an opinion, and it should be an opinion. It should not be a fact. If you're making the argument that Romeo and Juliet is a play, it's not a claim. That's not a thesis. Romeo and Juliet's a play. Or if you're arguing that Romeo and Juliet the play is better than one of the movie versions, well, that's something different. That's an argument. And so somebody might argue the opposing side, and that gets into counter arguments. But the biggest thing that I want us to get from this specific slide is that it's the most important sentence, it's what you're trying to prove, and it can't be a fact. So how do we do this? Well, what are the keys to writing a good thesis? Well, the first thing we got to do is we got to make sure it's pretty specific. It can't be super specific. If you create a really, really specific thesis statement, it's going to be maybe a little bit of a struggle for you to find information. So we want to keep it specific, and then in our paper, we're only going to talk about the things that we're talking about in our thesis. We don't want to talk about anything else, and we don't want to talk about, way more than we need to. But like, for example, if I'm saying Coke is better than Pepsi, I'll go back to that example again. If I'm saying Coke is better than Pepsi as a soda, I'm not going to start talking about Sprite, right? Why would I talk about Sprite? I'm trying to prove Coke is better than Pepsi. I'm not going to bring other sodas or juice or like pizza into this. I'm only going to cover, as it says here, what I'm discussing in my thesis statement. So if you're going to say that, going back to our assignment sheet, that the coronavirus is a more dangerous virus than the plague, if that's your thesis statement, that's what your whole paper should prove. Only that element, right? Aside from the counterargument, which addresses the opposing side, you don't want to get into other arguments or other plagues or whatever. You might not, talk about those, because the whole point is you want to be specific and focus on the things that you say you're going to focus on. This is what trips a couple people up, is they say they're going to talk about one thing in their paper, and then down the line, I read their paper and they're like, whoa, you're not talking about this. So be sure that you're doing that. Structurally, it's at the end of your introduction. We usually see it as in this, especially in this paper. As you get older, it might change, but in this paper, I'm going to look for it as the last sentence of your introduction. Very simple. So when you look at your introduction, look at the last sentence of your introduction. There's your thesis. If it's not there, you're going to lose credit. So I want to make sure that I'm saying it again. I'm saying it clearly. The thesis statement appears at the end of the first paragraph of a paper. So when I look at your paper, I look at the first paragraph, and I look at the last sentence of your first paragraph, your introduction, I'm going to say, is this your thesis? And you're going to say, no. Well, your thesis should be here. When we look at introduction writing, it'll make sense why. So I'm going to talk about that very clearly in the introduction section in a few videos. Finally, if you start writing now and you have an idea of what your thesis is, but as you research a little bit, you start writing a little bit, but your thesis changes, your topic, your thesis, everything might change. You can change your thesis. You don't have to start your paper and create a thesis and then say, oh, my thesis has to stay that way. We call this the evolving thesis. If you're changing your thesis as you're writing, that's fine. It's actually good. It shows that your paper is moving and adjusting based off of your research and based off of what you're finding. If you say, I'm locking it in and this is what it's going to be, and then you find different information and you change your opinion and you're like, no, I'm keeping it this way, but your paper's changed, then it's not going to make sense. Everything's going to be misaligned. So feel free to change your thesis statement as you change your paper. That's fine. And that's, like I said, that's good. Really good writers do that. So that's what we want you to do. So as we practice, what we want to do is we want to look at some of these samples here, right? We have 3 samples here. I'll read each of them. I want you to think, and then we'll walk through why one is good, why one is okay, and why one is the best. Which thesis statement is the most effective for an argument about the need for V-chips in television sets? So to provide a little bit of background, a V-chip stands for like valence chip. And a valence chip is basically this idea of a chip that is supposed to go into a television set to prevent little kids from seeing violent programming and violent things on television. So hopefully that makes you understand what this is talking about. So I'll read these three all in a row, let you think, keep in your head which one is the best, and kind of rank them. The best, okay, and probably the worst. Okay? Number one, parents often too busy to watch television shows with their families can monitor their children's viewing habits with the aid of the V-chip. Number two, to help parents monitor their children's viewing habits, the V-chip should be a required feature for television sets sold in the US. Number three, this paper will describe a V-chip and examine the uses of the V-chip in American-made television sets. Take a second, read them over. What's the best? Which one's me? And which one's not very good? All right, here we go. So we'll start with the worst. Hopefully we've discovered that the worst one is going the wrong way. It's this one right here. This paper will describe a V-chip and examine the uses of the V-chip in American-made television sets. The reason I would say personally that this one is the worst is we never want to tell the reader things directly. We always talk about this, and I always write these comments on your papers. Don't tell me what you're going to tell me, right? I'm not an idiot. You may think I'm an idiot, but I'm actually not. So please don't tell me what you're going to tell me. Don't tell me what the paper is going to say. I'll read it. I have to. So don't say what the paper is going to do. What you could do is just cut off, the first part and get into the actual content. But even still, that thesis statement's a little too short, right? So that leaves the first two. What I would say is that the first one is a little too unwieldy. It's got a little too much content. And it also, as it says, parents often too busy to watch, gets a little too, often too busy to watch the television shows with their families can monitor. It's not bad, but I think the middle one is the best because it has a very clear claim. It has a very clear idea of what the person is saying, which is that the V-chip should be a featured element in television sets. So that way I could argue and say, no, it shouldn't. So it's pretty clear, like if I was going to be the opposition, I would say it shouldn't be. And then I could say, well, here's some reasons why. Because the first one doesn't necessarily provide that option as clearly as the second one does. So let's look at doing the exact same thing and create let's know that we're creating a bad one first. So our topic that we want to construct is, if we get into it, I like to use the example from our assignment of COVID-19 versus the plague, right? So if that's our example, and we know we were going to do a bad one, right? I'll go bad and then good. And so we'll keep out the middleman. So if we're going to do a bad one would be something like, in this essay, right, I am going to prove that COVID-19 is worse than the plague, right? And I'll even keep it lowercase so that way we know it's bad, right? So why would that be bad? Well, like we said, we don't want to tell our audience what we're going to tell them. So please, make sure that we're not in our thesis statement saying things like, in this essay, I am going to. Don't tell me what you're going to tell me, right? You could just say COVID-19 is worse than the plague. That's already a better thesis statement. But still, that's not as good as the one that we're about to construct right now. So if we're going to come up with one that's better, right, I might say something along the lines of, the plague is a more significant, right? I'm going to use a fancy word, right? The plague is a more significant, what's the word I would be looking for? The plague is a more significant event regarding human The plague is a more significant event regarding human sickness rather than COVID-19, right? So again, just coming up with this off the top of my head, we could adjust the language a little bit because I'm going to say one reason why the plague is more significant regarding human sickness is because the plague, and then I would provide a piece of information that supports that. So that's how it works. It's just providing a little bit of specificity. Is I'm talking about why it's more significant. I'm talking about why it's more important for human sickness. So that's really it. That's the main idea. So going forward, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you have a really strong thesis statement, that thesis statement is constructed in such a way that your audience knows exactly what you're talking about, that it goes, if you're going to start writing your rough draft or you're going to start planning things out, it's the last sentence of your introduction, and that if you have any questions, you feel free to reach out to me. So hopefully this answers any questions, and we'll look for video number 4 to be starting soon. All right. Talk to you guys soon. Be safe out there.